It was 1,908. Napoleon Hill was 25 years old, working as a journalist for a magazine publisher whose assignment had brought him to Andrew Carnegie's estate in Pittsburgh for what he expected to be a standard interview with the world's wealthiest man. It was not a standard interview. Carnegie spent 3 days with the young journalist. Not the polished, rehearsed, reputation-managing performance of a public figure receiving the press 3 days of genuine conversation, genuine examination, genuine disclosure. Carnegie talked about his philosophy, about the principles he had observed operating in his own life and in the lives of the extraordinary people he had known, about his belief that those principles could be organized, codified, and made available to any person regardless of their background or their starting circumstances, that the difference between the extraordinary life and the ordinary one was not birth or luck or the specific advantage of favorable circumstance, but a specific, identifiable, learnable set of mental disciplines and practical strategies. And then, at the end of the third day, Carnegie proposed something. He proposed that Hill spend the next 20 years of his life doing the research. Not as Carnegie's employee, Carnegie would pay nothing. Not with Carnegie's organizational support, Hill would fund the research himself, however he could, however long it took. Not with any guarantee of outcome. There was no publishing contract, no institutional backing, no assurance that 20 years of effort would produce anything the world would recognize as worth the investment. What Carnegie offered was access, introduction letters, the specific, remarkable, irreplaceable gift of the doors he could open to 500 of the most successful, most powerful, and most extraordinarily productive human beings in America, people who would not speak honestly about the principles behind their achievement to anyone who arrived without Carnegie's personal endorsement. The access was real. The access was extraordinary. The access was worth everything. But the commission was unpaid. The timeline was 20 years. The outcome was uncertain, and the condition for accepting it was specific, strange, and as Hill later came to understand, the most important test of the entire 20-year project. Carnegie reached under his desk and retrieved a stopwatch. He had set it running at the moment he finished proposing the commission. He told Hill he would give him 60 seconds to decide, and that if Hill needed more than 60 seconds to make a decision of this magnitude, Carnegie would withdraw the offer, because a man who could not decide in 60 seconds whether a 20-year opportunity aligned with his purpose was not the man Carnegie needed to build the philosophy. Hill said yes in 29 seconds. He did not know in those 29 seconds how he would fund the research. He did not have a plan. He did not have savings sufficient for 20 years of uncertain effort. He did not have certainty about the outcome, the timeline, or the specific return on the investment of 2 decades of his life. He had the decision, he had the commitment, he had the specific, irreversible, burning desire-backed yes that the commission required and that the stopwatch was measuring. What he did not fully understand, what would take him the 20 years that followed to understand completely, was that the strange condition Carnegie had attached to the commission was not merely a test of his decisiveness. It was the first, most direct, most personally consequential demonstration of the philosophy he had just agreed to spend 20 years documenting. Let us begin with the condition itself, because the specific strange thing about Carnegie's commission was not the unpaid nature of it, though that was extraordinary enough. It was the specific combination of elements that Carnegie had designed into the offer elements that, taken together, constitute the most complete, most demanding, and most instructive practical examination of Napoleon Hill's philosophy ever constructed. The first element was the removal of extrinsic motivation. By offering no money, Carnegie ensured that Hill's engagement with the project, if it happened at all, would be driven by intrinsic motivation, by the specific identity level commitment to a purpose that the person genuinely finds worthy of their highest effort regardless of the financial return. Not the motivated preference of someone doing excellent work for adequate compensation. The burning desire of someone doing the work because it is, in the deepest available sense, what they are for. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester, whose self-determination theory we have discussed at length in previous episodes, have documented the specific qualitative difference between work produced under intrinsic motivation and work produced under extrinsic motivation. The difference is not merely motivational, it is qualitative. The creative, integrative, deeply personal work that produces genuine insight, the kind of understanding that can be communicated with the authenticity and the depth that transforms lives, is specifically, documentably the product of intrinsic motivation. The work done for money, however excellent, carries the specific limitations of work whose direction is shaped by the needs of the person paying. The work done from genuine identity-level commitment to a purpose one has freely chosen carries no such limitation. It is organized entirely around the truth of what is being studied rather than around the requirements of what is being paid for. Carnegie needed Hill to produce the latter. He needed the philosophy to emerge from 20 years of the most direct, most personal, most genuinely committed investigation of the principles of achievement that it was possible to conduct. And he understood, with the specific, hard-won wisdom of a man who had organized thousands of people toward extraordinary outcomes, that this quality of investigation could not be purchased. It could only be invited. And the invitation required the specific design of a commission so demanding, so remuneratively uncompromising, and so dependent on the candidate's own intrinsic commitment that the people who accepted it for the wrong reasons would fail, and the person who accepted it for the right reason because it was, in the deepest and most undeniable sense, what they were for would produce the work that could not be produced any other way. The unpaid commission was not a financial test. It was a purpose test. The question it was asking was the same question that this channel's entire body of work has been asking in different forms throughout its duration. Is what you are committing to genuinely your definite chief aim, the specific identity level, burning desire-backed purpose that is yours irreducibly and uniquely, or is it an attractive opportunity whose attractiveness depends, at least in part, on the specific financial return it promises? Hill's 29-second yes was the answer, not because 29 seconds is a magic number, but because the speed of the decision was the evidence that the question, is this your purpose, had already been answered. Not by the commission. The commission had simply made the answer visible. The second element of Carnegie's strange condition was the timeline, 20 years. Not a project with a near-term deadline, a visible horizon, a specific milestone that the early months of effort would bring into clear view. 20 years, a span of time so large that its end was, at the moment of the commission, genuinely beyond the imaginative horizon. A span of time that encompassed what would turn out to be marriages, financial collapses, world wars, personal devastation, periods of inspired progress, and periods of crushing stagnation. Most people, presented with a 20-year project for which they would not be paid, would engage in exactly the kind of deliberative calculation that Carnegie's stopwatch was designed to prevent. The specific, hedged, provisional consideration of whether the 20-year investment could be justified by a sufficiently certain return. The mental rehearsal of contingency plans, of exit strategies, of the specific conditions under which the project might reasonably be abandoned if the early years did not produce the results that would justify the continuation. This deliberation, however reasonable, however financially prudent, however evidentially sound, is the specific cognitive process that produces not the burning desire of the definite chief aim, but the motivated preference of the attractive opportunity. The person who deliberates before committing is the person who is still deciding whether the commitment is worth it. The person whose decision is made in 29 seconds is the person for whom the worthiness is not a question, for whom the only question is when to begin. Carnegie understood that the 20-year timeline was not the obstacle to the commission, but the test of the quality of the commitment it required. The person capable of genuinely committing to 20 unpaid years was not the person who had carefully calculated that 20 years was likely to be worth it. It was the person for whom 20 years was irrelevant to the fundamental fact of the commitment, for whom the duration of the project was simply the duration required, and the absence of pay was simply the absence of the distraction that pay would introduce into the quality of the work. Hill later described his understanding of the 20-year timeline in terms that once you understand the principle behind Carnegie's condition, have a precision that his more commonly quoted passages do not. When I accepted the commission, I did not think of 20 years as a cost. I thought of it as a canvas. The larger the canvas, the more complete the picture that could be painted on it. Carnegie was not asking me to sacrifice 20 years. He was offering me 20 years in which to understand completely something that a lesser canvas would have required me to understand partially. 20 years as a canvas. Not a cost, but a condition of completeness, the specific duration that the depth of the understanding Carnegie was commissioning required, and that no lesser timeline could have produced. This is the definite chief aim at its most demanding temporal scale, not the goal with a comfortable deadline, but the purpose with an honest one, the commitment that takes exactly as long as the understanding it is building requires, regardless of what the person making it would prefer in terms of timeline. The third element of the strange condition, the one that Hill identified in retrospect as the most philosophically significant, was what Carnegie did not offer alongside the access and the timeline. He did not offer certainty. There was no guarantee that the 500 conversations would produce a coherent philosophy. No guarantee that the philosophy, if it was produced, would be publishable. No guarantee that the published work, if it appeared, would reach the people it was intended to reach. No guarantee that Hill himself would survive the 20 years, financially or personally, in a condition capable of completing the project. The commission was, from any reasonable evidential standpoint, an enormous risk. And Carnegie not only did not offer to mitigate the risk, he specifically declined to do so. When Hill, in the days following the commission, asked Carnegie whether he would provide any financial backing for the research, Carnegie said no. When Hill asked whether Carnegie could guarantee the access that his letters were supposed to provide would actually be granted, Carnegie said he could not guarantee it, that the doors he could open were many, but that what happened once they were open would depend entirely on Hill. Carnegie was commissioning not a research project, but a demonstration, a 20-year demonstration of whether the philosophy he was asking Hill to document could be lived by the person documenting it. Whether Hill could sustain the burning desire across 2 decades of uncertain, unrewarded effort, whether the faith that Hill would be asked to describe in his writing could be maintained in the specific, personal, financially costly conditions that the commission imposed. The philosophy required someone who had lived it. The commission was designed to produce someone who had. This is the most important thing about Carnegie's strange condition, and the thing that most people who know the story of Hill's commission have never fully appreciated. Carnegie did not give Hill a research project. He gave Hill an experience, the most comprehensive, most demanding, most personally consequential experience of the philosophy that the philosophy itself describes as required for its full development. The burning desire, tested by 20 years of unrewarded effort. The faith, tested by 20 years of uncertain outcome. The organized planning, tested by 20 years of self-funded research without institutional support, the mastermind in the form of the 500 extraordinary minds that Carnegie's access made available, the going the extra mile in the form of 2 decades of work whose return was entirely determined by the quality of what was produced rather than by the terms of any contract. Every principle in Think and Grow Rich was, before it was a chapter in the book, a lived experience in Hill's own life during the 20 years the commission required. And this is why the book has the specific quality that distinguishes it from everything that has been written in its tradition before and since. Not the comprehensiveness of the research, though the research was extraordinary. Not the elegance of the framework, though the framework is remarkable. The specific, unmistakable quality of something written by a person who had not merely studied the principles, but lived them, who had encountered every one of the 6 basic fears, who had experienced the specific, personal, financially devastating consequences of every failure of faith and every compromise of the definite chief aim, and who had therefore been given, by the 20 years the commission required, the one thing that no amount of research alone could have provided, the authority of lived understanding. Let us now examine what the 20 years actually cost Hill, because the full, honest, uncomfortable account of what the strange condition required of him in practice is the most direct demonstration available of why the philosophy it produced has the specific weight and the specific authority that it does. Hill's financial life during the 20 years of the commission was, by any conventional measure, catastrophic. He was bankrupt multiple times. His first marriage collapsed under the sustained financial pressure of the unremunerative research. He lived for extended periods in conditions that would have struck a reasonable outside observer as evidence not of a man in the middle of a great and important project, but of a man who had made a disastrous decision in 29 seconds and was paying for it indefinitely. He continued, not because the evidence supported the continuation. The evidence from the perspective of conventional financial prudence argued strongly for abandonment, not because the people around him endorsed the continuation. Many of them did not. And the specific personal cost of their non-endorsement was one of the 6 basic fears that the commission was requiring him to overcome. Because the 29-second decision had been made with the quality of commitment that Carnegie's stopwatch was measuring. And that quality of commitment, the burning desire installed at the identity level, the faith produced by the daily continued practice of the subconscious commission, the specific, irreversible orientation toward the definite chief aim that cosmic habit force eventually makes automatic, does not recognize the evidence of difficulty as the evidence of the wrong direction. Hill wrote about this period of his life with a specificity and a personal honesty that most people who know his philosophy have never fully registered, because it is in the work he wrote after the publication of Think and Grow Rich, rather than in the most famous book itself. He described the years of the commission as the period in which every principle he was studying was also being tested in his own life, often in the most direct and most personally costly way available. The chapter on persistence was not written from a position of comfortable success. It was written from the specific, lived experience of someone who had sustained effort across years of unrewarded, often financially devastating engagement with a project whose outcome was genuinely uncertain until the final years of the commission. The chapter on the 6 basic fears was not a theoretical taxonomy. It was an autobiography, the specific account of a mind that had encountered poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, and the full spectrum of the fears that Hill documented in the specific context of the conditions that Carnegie's strange commission had created. And the chapter on faith, the specific technical account of the neural state produced by autosuggestion, by the daily emotionally engaged rehearsal of the burning desire, by the consistent practice level engagement with the subconscious commission, was written by a man who had needed that faith in the most personal, most urgent, most practically consequential way available. He had lived the philosophy before he wrote it. The strange condition ensured it. Now let us examine the specific principle that Carnegie's condition was most directly designed to produce the principle that is both the foundation of Hill's philosophy and the one whose full meaning is most often lost, the reading of his work. It is faith. Not in the theological sense and not in the motivational sense in which the word is most commonly used. In the specific technical neural state describing sense that Hill was insistent about, and that we have examined in previous episodes from the neurological angle, Hill defines faith as a state of mind which may be induced or created by affirmation or repeated instructions to the subconscious mind through the principle of autosuggestion, a state of mind produced by a specific practice, not a pre-existing confidence, not a naturally occurring optimism, a specific neural condition that is the product of the consistent, daily, emotionally engaged reinforcement of the definite chief aim at the level of the subconscious mind. And he is explicit about why this specific neural condition is required for the extraordinary achievement the philosophy describes. Faith is the element, the chemical, which when mixed with prayer or with any other form of supplication gives one direct communication with infinite intelligence. The direct communication with infinite intelligence, the specific, productive, creatively generative state of a subconscious mind that has been sufficiently and consistently aligned with a definite chief aim that it begins to produce insights, solutions, and connections beyond what the conscious analytical mind could generate alone, is not produced by confidence or optimism or the motivational state that a generous salary and a clear publication contract would have provided. It is produced by the specific practice level, daily renewed engagement with the autosuggestion practice that Hill describes, and by the specific conditions that make the engagement genuine rather than performed. Those conditions are the conditions that Carnegie's strange commission created. A project for which there is no extrinsic reward, no guaranteed outcome, and no institutional support cannot be sustained by motivated preference. It cannot be sustained by the professional obligation that employment creates or the financial urgency that debt produces. It can only be sustained by the specific, subconsciously installed, daily renewed orientation toward the definite chief aim that is the technical definition of the faith Hill describes. Carnegie's commission required Hill to develop genuine faith not as a spiritual aspiration, but as a practical, functional necessity. The 20 years would not have been completed by a mind with less than faith in Hill's technical sense. They required it. And the specific daily practice of sustaining the commitment across 20 years of unrewarded effort was the specific experiential process by which Hill developed the deep, procedurally encoded, cosmic habit force installed understanding of faith that his written account of it reflects. You cannot write the chapter on faith from outside the experience of faith. You cannot describe the specific neural practice-produced quality of the deep subconscious conviction that the definite chief aim is real and will be achieved from the position of someone who has maintained that conviction only on the days when the evidence supported it. Hill's account of faith has the specific, experiential, authoritative quality it does because Carnegie's strange condition required him to develop the thing he was describing at scale across 2 decades in conditions where anything less than the genuine article would have ended the project before its completion. Let us now look at what the access that Carnegie provided actually was, because this is the dimension of the commission that has been most consistently underappreciated, and that is the most directly relevant to the principles of the mastermind that this channel has discussed. The 500 people to whom Carnegie's letters opened doors were not merely successful. They were the specific, extraordinary, in many cases unrepeatable assemblage of the most consequential, organizational, creative, scientific, and political minds of one of the most remarkable periods in American history. Carnegie introduced Hill to Thomas Edison, and the specific conversations between the two men produced insights about the relationship between the creative mind and the subconscious processing that preceded and confirmed the bedtime practice we have discussed at length. Carnegie introduced Hill to Henry Ford, and the specific extended engagement with Ford's organizational philosophy produced the understanding of the master decision and its relationship to persistence that is among the most important elements of the published philosophy. Carnegie introduced Hill to Theodore Roosevelt, to John D. Rockefeller, to William Howard Taft, to Woodrow Wilson, to men whose names are less remembered, but whose specific contributions to Hill's understanding of the principles he was documenting were equally significant. Each of these relationships was a mastermind in the specific technical sense that Hill's philosophy defines. Not a networking relationship or a mentoring relationship or even a friendship, though elements of all these were present in some cases. A specific, purposeful, mutually engaged encounter between minds committed to the understanding of the principles that produce extraordinary human achievement. An encounter organized around the shared definite chief aim of producing a philosophy, comprehensive enough to change the trajectory of millions of lives. The third mind that Hill's mastermind principle describes as emerging from these encounters is not a metaphor in the account of the 20 years. It is a description of the specific, identifiable, philosophically consequential moments in which the conversation between Hill and the extraordinary figures Carnegie introduced him to produced insights that neither person had arrived, with insights that emerged from the specific, high-quality, deeply aligned engagement between minds that Carnegie's access made possible, and that the 20 years of sustained commitment made valuable enough to seek. Carnegie's access was not merely social capital. It was intellectual capital, the specific, organized, purposefully curated exposure to the most concentrated available sample of the minds that had most deeply implemented the principles Hill was trying to understand. The mastermind principle, as a concept in Hill's published philosophy, was not derived from the theoretical reading of other philosophers' accounts of collaboration. It was derived from the direct experience of 20 years of the specific, purposeful, Carnegie-facilitated encounters that constituted, in practice, the most comprehensive mastermind experiment in the history of self-development research. Hill knew the principle was real because he had lived inside it for 2 decades, had observed its operation in every one of the 500 encounters that Carnegie's introductions enabled, and had experienced its specific products, the emergent insights, the unexpected connections, the ideas that arrived in the conversation that neither participant had brought to it with a frequency and a consistency that made the theoretical account of the third mind not a philosophical aspiration, but a documented empirical finding. There is a specific element of Carnegie's strange condition that has never been fully described in any account of the commission that this channel has encountered, but that the specific, honest examination of what the commission produced suggests was the most carefully designed element of all. It is the condition of failure. Carnegie did not merely fail to protect Hill from the financial and personal adversities that the commission produced. He specifically designed the commission in a way that made those adversities not just possible, but over a 20-year period, virtually certain. No financial compensation, meant no financial cushion against the specific inevitable reversals that the research and the writing would produce. No institutional backing meant no organizational infrastructure to absorb the specific inevitable setbacks of an individual working without support. No guaranteed outcome meant no psychological protection against the specific inevitable periods of doubt and discouragement that the absence of visible progress produces in any sustained long-term project. Carnegie's condition was not merely demanding, it was adversity ensuring. It was the specific design of a commission that would, over 20 years, subject a person conducting it to the full range of the adversities that the philosophy being documented described as the specific necessary conditions for the development of the qualities the philosophy recommends. Hill's principle that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit was not derived from the study of other people's adversity alone. It was derived from 20 years of the specific, personal, financially devastating, relationally costly, persistently demanding experience of adversity in the most direct and most consequential form available. The adversity of someone who had committed to a 20-year project for which they were not being paid, whose outcome was uncertain, whose social environment frequently viewed the commitment as questionable, and who had to find in each of the adversities that the commission produced the specific seed of benefit that the philosophy promised was present. The benefit was always present. Hill found it every time, not because he was optimistic or because his philosophy made him immune to the experience of defeat, but because the specific practice, daily renewed engagement with the philosophy, the autosuggestion, the mastermind encounters, the organized planning, the going the extra mile in the service of the research itself produced consistently and across 2 decades of adversity the specific insights and adjustments and refinements and reorientations that the philosophy promised every adversity would contain. The adversity confirmed the philosophy by requiring its application, and the philosophy, continuously applied, converted the adversity into the understanding that made the eventual work extraordinary. Carnegie's strange condition was not only a test of Hill's definite chief aim, it was the specific 20-year experiential curriculum through which the understanding required to document the philosophy was built not in the reading of other people's implementations, but in the direct, personal, highest stakes available experience of implementing it. Let us now examine what this means for the specific, practical, immediately applicable lesson that Carnegie's commission offers the person watching this video, because the commission is not merely a historical anecdote about one man's extraordinary agreement with another extraordinary man. It is the paradigm case of everything this channel has been building toward. The commission is the definite chief aim, accepted with a 2-9, second irreversibility that makes it genuinely burning rather than preferentially motivated. It is the going the extra mile without the guarantee of return, the specific, voluntary, intrinsically motivated service that the law of increasing returns eventually rewards at rates that the contracted, extrinsically compensated service can never approach. It is the faith produced not by comfortable circumstances, but by the daily practice-level renewal of the subconscious commission in the specific conditions where faith is not a luxury but a survival requirement. It is the mastermind in its most intentionally constructed, most purposefully organized, most direct access to extraordinary minds form. And it is the organized planning, the specific, self-funded, 20-year project management of someone who has no organizational infrastructure to rely on and must therefore develop every organizational capability that the project requires from their own resources. The ordinary person's life does not include Andrew Carnegie. It does not include introductions to 500 extraordinary minds or 3 days of conversation with the richest person on earth or a proposal delivered with a stopwatch running. But the ordinary person's life does include the possibility available today, not requiring Carnegie's introductions or Carnegie's stopwatch of making the specific 2-9 second quality of decision that Hill made in Carnegie's study. The decision that is not the careful, hedged, contingency planning deliberation of someone deciding whether the commitment is worth the risk. The decision that is the immediate, burning, desire-backed identity level yes that requires no deliberation because the question it answers has already been answered. The question is not whether to commit. The question is whether you have already, in the deepest available sense, committed, and whether the decision you are about to make is the formalization of that commitment or the first genuine moment of its existence. Carnegie's stopwatch was measuring whether Hill's decision was a formalization or an origination. If Hill had needed the full 60 seconds, if he had used those 60 seconds to deliberate about the financial risk, the timeline uncertainty, the social cost of the commitment, he would have demonstrated that the decision was being made in real time, that the burning desire did not yet exist, and the deliberation was the attempt to generate it from the evidence available. 29 seconds demonstrated that the deliberation was unnecessary, that the burning desire was already present, that the commission was not creating the commitment but revealing it. This is the paradigm case because it is the most direct available demonstration of the distinction that this channel has been trying to name throughout its entire body of work. The distinction between the definite chief aim and the attractive opportunity, between the purpose that requires no cost-benefit analysis because the cost-benefit analysis has already been concluded at the identity level, and the goal that requires deliberation because the commitment is being made on the basis of the evidence rather than on the basis of the identity. Carnegie's commission was attractive. It was also uncertain, unremunerative, long, and demanding. For anyone whose commitment was based on the attractiveness rather than the identity-level purpose, the uncertainty and the cost would have eventually outweighed the attraction. And the commission would have been abandoned before the 20 years produced the work that required 20 years to produce. For Hill, the 29-second yes was not a decision about whether the commission was attractive enough to justify the cost. It was the recognition, instantaneous, certain, pre-deliberative, that this was the specific thing he was for, the canvas of the right size for the picture that was already present in him. There is one final dimension of Carnegie's strange condition that deserves extended treatment, the dimension that connects the specific historical documented fact of the commission to the deepest philosophical principle in Hill's entire body of work. Carnegie's condition was strange not merely because of what it asked. It was strange because of what it assumed. The assumption embedded in the design of the commission in the unpaid nature, the 20-year timeline, the absence of institutional support, the built-in adversity was that the person who accepted it with the 2-9, second quality of commitment, was not primarily accepting an opportunity. They were accepting a calling. The distinction between an opportunity and a calling is the distinction that this entire series of videos has been building toward from its very first episode. The distinction between the goal and the definite chief aim, between the motivated preference and the burning desire, between the disciplined effort toward an attractive outcome and the natural, effortless, cosmic, habit force installed expression of an identity that has found the specific work it was always meant to do. Carnegie's strange condition was designed to filter for the person who experienced the commission as the latter rather than the former, for whom the 20 years were not a cost but a canvas, for whom the absence of financial compensation was not a sacrifice but a liberation, the removal of the distorting influence of the extrinsic reward that would have made the work less free, less true, and less capable of producing the specific, authoritative, experience-based understanding that the philosophy required. The assumption was that such a person existed, that somewhere in the landscape of intelligent, capable, curious minds who might be brought to Carnegie's study, there was a specific person for whom this specific commission was the specific calling, the work that was not merely worth doing, but was, in the deepest available sense, the work that needed to be done by them. 29 seconds confirmed the assumption. And the 20 years that followed, with all their cost, all their adversity, all their unremunerative demand, and all their extraordinary access-enabled, mastermind-supported, faith-tested, burning desire-sustained intellectual richness produced the specific work that the assumption was designed to make possible. Think and grow rich, not the summary of other people's success, the distilled, experience-tested, adversity-refined, personally lived documentation of the principles that a 20-year calling produced in the specific person who accepted the specific commission in 29 seconds. This is what Carnegie gave Hill. Not a job, not a contract, not even an opportunity in the conventional sense in which the word is used. A mirror, a 20-year mirror designed to reflect with the specific high-resolution clarity of lived experience whether the person looking into it was capable of being the person the philosophy described. Hill looked into the mirror for 20 years, and what emerged from the looking was not merely a philosophy of achievement, but the specific, lived, procedurally encoded, personally authorized understanding that gives the philosophy its specific authority. You cannot write the chapter on burning desire without having had your desire tested by 20 years of unrewarded, uncertain, adversity-producing effort. You cannot write the chapter on faith without having needed faith in its most urgent, most personally consequential form. You cannot write the chapter on persistence without having sustained the effort across the specific devastating moments when stopping was the only reasonable available choice. And you cannot write any of it with the authority that comes from something other than the direct 20-year commission-imposed, Carnegie-designed experience of having lived every principle before documenting it. The specific practical thing this video is asking of you is not a commitment to 20 years of unrewarded effort. Carnegie's commission was specific to Hill, to the specific moment in history in which it was offered, and to the specific calling that Hill's nature and preparation had produced. What it is asking is this: are you waiting for the equivalent of Carnegie's commission before you begin your own 20-year investment in your definite chief aim? Not the literal equivalent, not the letter of introduction from the world's richest person or the 3-day interview in a Pittsburgh estate, but the psychological equivalent, the specific external permission, the organizational backing, the financial guarantee, the social endorsement, the certainty of outcome that would make the commitment feel reasonable enough to make without the 29-second quality of decision that Carnegie's stopwatch was measuring. Because if you are waiting for those things, you are waiting for something that Carnegie deliberately withheld from Hill in order to ensure that the commitment, when it came, was the real thing. The definite chief aim does not become real when the conditions for it are favorable. It becomes real when the decision is made with the specific, evidence-independent, identity-level finality that makes the conditions and implementation detail rather than a prerequisite. Carnegie's stopwatch is not running. There is no 60 seconds. There is only the specific, quiet, honest recognition of whether the thing you are building or preparing to build or reading about building is the canvas that the picture already present in you requires. If it is, if that recognition is present, then the 29-second decision is the only thing between you and the beginning. Write it in the comments. Not what you are planning or considering or preparing for. The specific 29-second quality decision about the definite chief aim, the one that does not require more deliberation because the deliberation is over. Write it, make it public, make it real, Carnegie could not offer you the access, but the community that gathers in this channel is the specific, purposes-aligned, mutually invested group of people who can offer you something that is, in Hill's technical definition of the mastermind, its closest available contemporary equivalent. They are here. The decision is yours. If this video clarified something about the relationship between commitment and preparation, about the difference between the 29-second decision and the deliberation that never produces it, share it. There is someone in your life who has been waiting for Carnegie's commission before beginning their own. Give them this instead. Subscribe if this tradition is yours. And make the decision. 29 seconds.